The morning sun cast long shadows across Memory Grove Park as joggers began their daily routines through the tree-lined paths of Salt Lake City. It was July 19th, 2004, and the mountain air carried the promise of another beautiful summer day. In a modest home, just minutes from the park, Lori Hacking stirred in her bed, her hand instinctively moving to her growing belly where her 5-month-old baby rested peacefully. At 27, Lori embodied everything her Mormon community valued. Devotion to family, unwavering faith, and genuine kindness that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Her colleagues at the brokerage firm where she worked respected her integrity. Her friends cherished her loyalty, and her family adored her infectious optimism. She had built a life of purpose and meaning, anchored by her marriage to Mark Hacking, the man she believed would soon fulfill his dream of becoming a doctor. But as Lori prepared for what she thought would be another ordinary day, she had no idea that her husband's entire life was an elaborate fiction, or that this morning would be her last. 5 years earlier, Mark Hacking had been a different person entirely, or at least he had seemed to be. When he first approached Lori at a church gathering in 1999, he possessed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where life is headed. He spoke passionately about his pre-medical studies at the University of Utah, painting vivid pictures of the lives he would save as a physician, following in the footsteps of his respected father, Dr. Douglas Hacking. Lori found herself captivated not just by Mark's apparent ambition, but by his seeming certainty about their future together. He described the house they would own, the children they would raise, the service they would provide to their community. For a young woman who valued stability and purpose, Mark's vision felt like a beautiful dream made manifest. Their courtship unfolded like something from a fairy tale. Mark would pick her up after her long days at the brokerage firm, regaling her with stories from his anatomy classes and clinical rotations. He spoke knowledgeably about medical procedures, quoted his professors, and even brought home what appeared to be textbooks and study materials. When Lori offered to help him study, Mark would smile and tell her that her support was all he needed, that just knowing she believed in him gave him the strength to excel. They married in the Salt Lake Temple in a ceremony attended by hundreds of friends and family members. Lori walked down the aisle in radiant white, her face glowing with the certainty that she was beginning the greatest adventure of her life. Mark stood at the altar, handsome in his temple clothes, accepting congratulations from relatives who spoke proudly of the future. What none of them knew, what Lori couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares, was that every word Mark had spoken about his academic progress was a lie. For 5 years, Mark Hacking lived a double life with the skill of a professional actor. Each morning, he would kiss Lori goodbye and drive toward the university campus, but instead of attending classes, he would spend his days in coffee shops, libraries, through simply driving aimlessly through the city. He had failed most of his classes early in his academic career and had essentially stopped attending school altogether, but he had become masterful at maintaining the illusion of scholarly progress. Mark created fake email accounts using professor names and sent himself grades and feedback that he would casually show to Lori. He purchased medical textbooks from used bookstores and highlighted random passages to leave conspicuously around their home. When Lori asked about his studies, Mark would launch into detailed explanations of surgical procedures or diagnostic techniques he had learned from television medical dramas and internet research. The psychological toll of maintaining such an elaborate deception was immense, but Mark had become addicted to the admiration and respect his lies generated. He loved the way Lori's eyes lit up when he described his latest academic achievement, cherished the pride in his father's voice when Dr. Hacking bragged about his son to colleagues. The truth that he was a failure, a fraud, a man incapable of achieving even basic academic success, felt too devastating to confront. As the years passed, Mark's deception required increasingly sophisticated maintenance. He learned to forge transcripts, created fictional study groups, and even invented research projects he claimed to be conducting with renowned professors. Meanwhile, Lori thrived in her career, earning recognition for her professional integrity and building a reputation as someone clients could trust completely. The irony was lost on Mark. His wife had become genuinely successful, while he lived entirely in a world of make-believe. In early 2004, Mark faced the inevitable reckoning. After years of claiming to be a pre-medical student, he told Lori he had been accepted to medical school at the University of North Carolina. The lie came so naturally that he almost believed it himself as he watched Lori's face transform with joy and pride. "I knew you could do it," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she threw her arms around him. "I'm so proud of you, Mark. You're going to be an amazing doctor." The weight of her faith in him was crushing. Mark realized in that moment that he had created a monster he could no longer control. Lori immediately began making plans for their relocation, researching neighborhoods in North Carolina, and dreaming about their new life. She gave notice at her job, began organizing their belongings, and spoke excitedly to friends and family about Mark's acceptance to medical school. Then came the news that changed everything. Lori was pregnant. The pregnancy, while unplanned, was welcomed with overwhelming joy by both families. Lori glowed with happiness as she imagined raising their child near Mark's medical school, creating a perfect life in a new state. She began reading pregnancy books, planning the nursery, and talking about how wonderful it would be for their baby to grow up with a father who was a doctor. For Mark, the pregnancy represented the final nail in the coffin of his deception. Not only did he now have to face the complete collapse of his lies, but he would be destroying the dreams of his unborn child as well. The pressure became unbearable. As summer arrived, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours without explanation, claiming he was meeting with professors or handling paperwork for their move. In reality, he was driving aimlessly through the mountains, sometimes sitting in his car for hours, trying to figure out how to extract himself from the impossible situation he had created. Lori noticed the changes but attributed them to the natural stress of preparing for medical school and impending fatherhood. When Mark snapped at her over minor issues, she would gently remind him that everything would work out fine. When he seemed distant and preoccupied, she would ask if there was anything she could do to help. Her continued faith in him only deepened his self-loathing. The breaking point came when Lori announced she wanted to visit North Carolina to look for housing and get familiar with their new home. Mark knew that any such trip would immediately expose his lies. There was no medical school enrollment, no student housing, no academic schedule to coordinate around. He began creating increasingly desperate excuses to delay the trip, but Lori was persistent and organized, the kind of person who liked to have everything planned well in advance. During this period, Mark's internet activity became increasingly disturbing. He researched methods of disappearing, creating new identities, and even more troubling topics related to violence and death. His search history would later reveal a man spiraling toward a desperate solution to an impossible problem. July 18, 2004. At a family gathering, Mark and Lori had what several relatives later described as a tense conversation about their upcoming move. Mark appeared agitated when questioned about the specifics of his medical school program, giving vague answers and changing the subject whenever possible. Lori, still unaware of the depth of his deception, tried to smooth over the awkwardness and reassure their family that everything was proceeding perfectly. That night, lying in bed next to his sleeping wife, Mark made the decision that would destroy everything. The morning that changed everything, Lori woke early on July 19th, as was her habit. The baby had been active during the night, and she was excited to start the day with her usual morning jog through Memory Grove Park. The exercise helped with her pregnancy symptoms and gave her energy for the busy day ahead. She had a long list of tasks related to their move, and she wanted to call the real estate agent in North Carolina to discuss housing options. Mark later claimed that they argued that morning, though the exact nature of the argument varied in his different confessions to police. What remained consistent was his assertion that Lori was asking questions about North Carolina and medical school that he could no longer deflect. According to Mark, something inside him snapped during this conversation. What happened next was both shocking in its brutality and revealing in its calculation. As Lori lay in bed, presumably still discussing their future plans, Mark retrieved a .22 caliber rifle from their bedroom closet. Without warning, without giving his wife any chance to understand what was happening, he shot her once in the head. Lori Hacking died instantly, along with the unborn child she had been carrying. She never knew what was coming, never had a moment to plead for her life or that of their baby. In a single moment, Mark had eliminated the two people who represented both his greatest love and his most devastating problem. The aftermath was swift and calculated. Mark wrapped Lori's body in bedding and carried her to their pickup truck. He drove to a remote area where he disposed of her remains in a dumpster that was scheduled to be emptied and taken to the local landfill. The location was carefully chosen to ensure that Lori's body would be buried under tons of garbage, making recovery nearly impossible. After disposing of his wife's body, Mark returned home and began implementing the final deception of his life. Mark's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Lori had gone for her usual morning jog and never returned. He carefully staged the scene at Memory Grove Park, leaving her car, running shoes, and other personal items in strategic locations. The staging was designed to suggest that something had happened to her during or after her run, possibly an abduction or random crime. When Mark called 911 to report his wife missing, his performance was Oscar-worthy. His voice cracked with apparent emotion as he described how he had woken up late and assumed Lori had already left for her jog. He provided detailed information about her running routine, expressed growing concern about her extended absence, and painted a picture of a devoted husband desperate to find his missing pregnant wife. "She always comes back by 9, he told the dispatcher, his voice breaking. "She's 5 months pregnant. She wouldn't just disappear. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." The 911 call was released to the media and played repeatedly on local news stations. To listeners, it sounded like the desperate plea of a loving husband faced with every married person's worst nightmare. The disappearance of a beautiful, pregnant young woman in Salt Lake City quickly became a major news story. Ew. Fit the profile of a victim who would generate significant public sympathy, and the media coverage was extensive from the very beginning. Local television stations provided hourly updates, and national news outlets soon picked up the story. The Salt Lake City Police Department launched a massive search effort. Hundreds of volunteers joined professional search teams in combing Memory Grove Park and the surrounding areas. The search included ground teams with dogs, helicopters scanning from above, and divers exploring nearby waterways. The Mormon community rallied around the Hacking family with characteristic determination, organizing prayer vigils and providing meals and support during what everyone assumed was a family's darkest hour. Mark played his role perfectly. He participated in searches, his face a mask of concern and determination as he called out his wife's name through the wooded paths where she had supposedly disappeared. He gave interviews to local reporters, his voice heavy with emotion as he described Lori's excitement about their baby and their upcoming move to North Carolina. "She had everything to live for," he told one television reporter, tears streaming down his face. "Our baby, medical school, our whole future together. She would never just leave. Someone took her, and I won't rest until we find out who." The performance was so convincing that even experienced detectives initially believed him. Mark appeared at press conferences with Lori's devastated parents, comforting them while maintaining his story about the morning jog that had gone horribly wrong. His own family provided unwavering support, with his father using his influence in the medical community to keep pressure on law enforcement to find Lori. Detective Phil Esslinger had been investigating missing persons cases for over a decade, and something about Mark's story bothered him from the beginning. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what felt wrong, but his instincts told him that the case wasn't as straightforward as a random abduction from a public park. The first red flags were small but significant. Mark's description of Lori's jogging route didn't quite match the evidence they found at Memory Grove Park. The staging of her car and belongings seemed too neat, too convenient. Real crime scenes are usually chaotic and random, while staged scenes often appear too organized. More troubling was Mark's behavior during questioning. While he appeared cooperative on the surface, he seemed to be steering investigators away from certain lines of inquiry. When detectives asked to search the family home, Mark was initially reluctant, though he eventually agreed. His timeline for the morning of Lori's disappearance seemed rehearsed rather than natural. The breakthrough came when Detective Esslinger decided to verify Mark's background claims. What he discovered was shocking. Mark Hacking was not a medical student, had never been accepted to UNC, and had been living an elaborate lie for years. Overwhelmed with this information, investigators confronted Mark about his deception. They watched as his carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the weight of professional questioning. The stress of maintaining multiple lies while being investigated for his wife's disappearance proved to be more than even Mark's skilled deception could handle. On July 24, 2004, just 5 days after reporting his wife missing, Mark Hacking suffered what appeared to be a complete mental breakdown. In the early morning hours, he was found running naked through a hotel parking lot, disoriented and incoherent. Witnesses described him as appearing to be in a state of complete psychological collapse. He was taken to a local hospital for psychiatric evaluation, and it was there that the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. While Mark was hospitalized and unable to maintain his deceptions, investigators obtained search warrants for his home, vehicle, and personal belongings. The evidence they found was damning. Blood evidence in the bedroom that matched Lori's DNA, forensic evidence indicating that a shooting had taken place in the house, and most devastating of all, Mark's internet search history from the days leading up to Lori's disappearance. His searches included topics like how to break a neck, body disposal methods, and various techniques for covering up violent crimes. Faced with overwhelming evidence and unable to maintain his lies while under psychiatric care, Mark finally confessed to his brothers during a hospital visit. The confession was simple and devastating. He had shot and killed his wife because he couldn't face telling her the truth about his deception. When Mark's brothers brought his confession to the police, it marked the end of the massive search effort and the beginning of a murder investigation. The community that had rallied around Mark in his supposed time of grief now had to confront the reality that he had been the perpetrator all along. Mark's full confession to police revealed the calculated nature of his crime. He admitted to planning Lori's murder as a solution to his problem, viewing her elimination as preferable to facing the consequences of his lies. He showed little remorse for killing his wife and unborn child, instead focusing on how difficult the situation had been for him. The details of his confession painted a picture of a man who had chosen murder over honesty, who had decided that maintaining his deception was more important than preserving the lives of the two people who depended on him most. He described the shooting with clinical detachment, as if discussing a problem he had solved rather than the taking of innocent lives. The search for Lori's body became a massive undertaking at the local landfill. Based on Mark's confession about disposing of her remains in a dumpster, investigators spent weeks sifting through thousands of tons of garbage. Despite their exhaustive efforts, Lori's body was never recovered, adding another layer of tragedy to an already devastating case. Mark Hacking was charged with first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, he eventually agreed to a plea bargain in April 2005. He pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for a sentence of 6 years to life in prison, avoiding execution, but ensuring he would spend decades behind bars. The plea agreement required Mark to provide complete details about how he had disposed of Lori's body, information that was crucial for bringing some measure of closure to her family. His statement to the court was emotionless and clinical, showing no remorse for his actions or understanding of the devastation he had caused. The case sent shockwaves through Salt Lake City's Mormon community, challenging assumptions about trust, marriage, and the potential for evil to hide behind a facade of respectability. Many who had known the couple struggled to reconcile the Mark they thought they knew with the calculating killer he had revealed himself to be. The revelation that Mark Hacking had murdered his wife sent shockwaves through Salt Lake City's Mormon community. The case challenged assumptions about trust, marriage, and the potential for evil to hide behind a facade of respectability. Many who had known the couple struggled to reconcile the Mark. They thought they knew what the cold-blooded killer he had revealed himself to be. The media coverage of the case was intense and often sensationalized. National news outlets descended on Salt Lake City, and the story became a fixture on cable news programs and true crime shows. The combination of a beautiful victim, a seemingly perfect marriage, and the shocking revelation of the husband's guilt made for compelling television. For the Mormon community specifically, the case raised uncomfortable questions about the pressure to maintain appearances and the potential consequences of living up to unrealistic expectations. Some community leaders used the tragedy as an opportunity to discuss the importance of honesty and seeking help when struggling with personal problems. The Soares family, Lori's parents and siblings, became reluctant public figures as they sought justice for their daughter while grieving her loss. Their dignity and grace under impossible circumstances earned them widespread sympathy and support from the community. Lori Hacking was remembered not as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman who had lived her life with integrity and purpose. Her friends and family spoke of her kindness, her professional success, and her excitement about becoming a mother. She had trusted her husband completely, never imagining that her faith in him would ultimately cost her life. The Soares family established a foundation in Lori's memory, focusing on supporting pregnant women and promoting awareness about domestic violence. They transformed their grief into a force for good, working to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. For the Mormon community, the case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of perfectionism and the importance of creating environments where people feel safe to seek help when struggling. Church leaders used the tragedy to emphasize the importance of honesty and the availability of support for those dealing with personal crises. Epilogue: Mark Hacking remains in prison, serving his sentence for one of Utah's most shocking crimes. Parole hearings have consistently resulted in his continued incarceration, as he has shown little genuine remorse for his actions or understanding of the magnitude of his crime. The murder of Lori Hacking stands as one of the most tragic examples of how deception and cowardice can escalate to unthinkable violence. Mark Hacking's refusal to face the truth about his failures cost 2 innocent lives and devastated multiple families. Lori Hacking was remembered not as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman who had lived her life with integrity and purpose. Her friends and family spoke of her kindness, her professionalism, and her excitement about becoming a... She had trusted the man she married completely, never imagining that her faith in him would ultimately cost her life. The case serves as a reminder that the most dangerous people are often those who appear most normal on the surface. Mark Hacking's ability to maintain his deception for years, while planning and executing murder, demonstrates how evil can hide behind a facade of respectability. Perhaps most tragically, the case illustrates how different choices by Mark at any point in his web of lies could have prevented the ultimate tragedy. Had he sought help for his psychological problems, confessed his academic failures, or simply chosen honesty over deception, Lori and their unborn child would still be alive. The story of Lori Hacking's murder is ultimately about the profound consequences of choosing deception over truth, and the innocent lives that can be lost when someone decides that maintaining a lie is more important than preserving life itself. It stands as a stark reminder that behind every headline about domestic violence is a real person whose life was cut short by someone who was supposed to love and protect them. Mark Hacking remains in prison, serving his sentence for one of Utah's most shocking crimes. Lori Hacking's memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the work being done to prevent similar tragedies. Her story serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to action for anyone who finds themselves living a lie, or knows someone who might be struggling with the pressure to maintain false appearances. On that beautiful July morning in 2004, as the sun rose over Salt Lake City and joggers began their daily routines through Memory Grove Park, Lori Hacking should have been starting just another day in a life filled with promise and purpose. Instead, she became the victim of the ultimate betrayal, killed by the very person who had promised to love and protect her forever. Her story serves as both a memorial to a life cut tragically short and a warning about the devastating consequences that can follow when someone chooses deception over truth, selfishness over love, and violence over accountability. In the end, Mark Hacking's perfect lie became the perfect tragedy, destroying not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who had believed in him. The case reminds us that seeking help, telling the truth, and facing consequences, no matter how difficult, is always preferable to the alternative that Mark Hacking chose on that tragic morning in July 2004.